So, thank you for having me again. My name is Jan Jozny, and I'm a PhD candidate in international relations at the University of West Bohemia in Pilsen, in Czech Republic. And I have prepared a presentation for you about the chances of creation of an alliance between the United States and Vietnam. So, let's begin. As you may know, the Indo-Pacific is a place where a power rivalry between China and the United States can be observed. As a rising power, China conducts action that not only collide with American interests, but put the whole regional rules-based order under the pressure. So the United States embarks on some balancing policies aimed at upholding the free and open Indo-Pacific, reducing the so-called China threat and diminishing of Chinese influence over secondary states in the contested area. By the term secondary states, I mean states like Cambodia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and others. So one of the policies that could be defined as an effort to deepening the existing alliances and establish new partnerships with regional players who share the same interests in preserving the order and face growing pressure from Beijing. One of the most discussed potential new partners is Vietnam, government of which is engaged in maritime territorial disputes with China over islands in the South China Sea. You can see them in the picture, mainly the Spratly Islands and the Paracel Islands. But how realistic is the deepening of the cooperation between Washington and Hanoi, or even the creation of informal or formal balancing alliance against China between these two countries remains a question. So this empirical-oriented presentation will focus on the political aspects of this issue and identify main foreign policy catalysts that support and inhibitors that impede the creation of a potential closer relations or alliance, if you want. So let me begin with political catalysts. If you want to understand the position of Vietnam, we need to go further into the history and start at the beginning of 1990s. The reason for this is quite obvious, because even though Vietnamese foreign and defense policies have shown necessary flexibility in reactions to external threats, there is a significant continuity of thought, and the main documents follow each other in, let's say, a conservative evolution. After the end of the bipolar confrontation, or the Cold War if you want, Hanoi faced the changes emanating from the transformation of the international order when the Soviet Union ceased to play the role of a guarantor of Vietnamese security. The result was the strategy of cooperation and struggle, approved in 1991. It stated that to ensure its security, Vietnam needs to diversify its international relations by establishing new links with states even outside former communist camp, and this is very important. Those included neighboring states, regional actors, and superpowers like the United States as well. It paved the way to the normalization of diplomatic relations with Washington in 1995, when the two former enemies became partners, and that's very important. The subsequent resolution number 8, the strategy of fatherland defense in a new situation, approved in 2003, has become a cornerstone of Vietnamese foreign policy because it further elaborated the ideas from the cooperation and struggle, stating that Vietnam had to choose friends based on its national interests and not the ideological affinity, also a very important part. So Hanoi should cooperate and struggle with all countries, measure their policies by a degree of harmony with its national interests, and accept the fact that any country could be a part of both categories simultaneously. So, for example, Vietnam can struggle with China over its territorial claims in the South China Sea, but cooperate with it, for example, in an economic sphere at the same time, you know? So, let's move on. After 10 years, Vietnam upgraded its stance as a reaction to the Chinese growing assertiveness in the South China Sea, or East Sea, as they say in Vietnam, and issued the resolution number 23 on national defense strategy in the new situation that stated the intention to balance among great powers. It emphasized the pressing need for a creation of strategic interests between Vietnam and other states, especially regional and global powers, and strategic partners. All these documents paved the way to the establishment of the so-called comprehensive partnership between the United States and Vietnam in 2013. Although this designation, I mean the comprehensive partnership, is lower than the former ties with states like Russia or China, it signals the readiness of both sides to formalize and develop better relations based on the same interests. You know, the word interest is very important here. So the question is, how far is Vietnam willing to go in the process of deepening the partnership with the United States? And, you know, it remains unclear. But the white paper on the defense of 2019 put some light on this issue because it declared that Vietnam was ready to participate in security and defense cooperation in the Indo-Pacific region and strengthen and deepen ties with strategic partners in case the security situation in the region deteriorated. The use of the term Indo-Pacific, together with the fact that the white paper was the first ever, and I would like to emphasize this, first ever official public document that explicitly named China and its actions in the South China Sea as a possible threat to the stability, made some scholars think that Hanoi could be ready to upgrade the partnership with the United States if it felt endangered by Chinese activities in disputed territories. So now let's move to the United States. When President Obama's pivot to Asia or rebalance to Asia was announced in 2011, it could be seen as a new impulse for the development of mutual relationship. Because by declaring America's intention to move the center of gravity of its foreign policy to Asia and Western Pacific, Obama expressed the intention to rejuvenate old alliances based on the so-called hub and spokes bilateral system and to establish and deepen new partnerships with states that share the same interests in defending the liberal regional order in Asia based on free trade, democracy, sovereignty, and international law. That led to the signing of the joint vision statement by President Obama and the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam, Nguyen Phu Trong, in Washington in 2015. Although both parties did not mention China explicitly, they manifested their concerns about the development of the situation in the South China Sea that threatened to undermine peace, security, and stability. That was a quotation. Declaring also their mutual interest in, and that's also a quotation, the peaceful resolution of disputes in conformity with international law, including reflected in the United States Convention on the Law of the Sea. So this development was sealed by Obama's official visit in Vietnam, to Vietnam in 2016, when he lifted the ban on the sale of lethal weapons to Vietnam and supported its sovereignty and independence. The issue of the national security strategy and national defense strategy under President Trump could be seen as a game changer in relations among the United States and Asia countries, because those documents announce a comeback of the great power rivalry, emphasize American indispensable role in preserving the so-called free and open Indo-Pacific, and offered support to countries that felt increasing pressure from the rise of China. They also called China a revisionist power that, and that's a quotation, expanded its power at the expense of the sovereignty of the others. The consequential release of the Department of Defense Indo-Pacific Strategy Report called for preserving peace through strength, and it explicitly mentioned Vietnam, and that's important, and talk about and that's also a quotation, increasingly strong defense ties that are based on common principles and interests. The strongest expression of the position of the United States towards Vietnam and its security concerns was the speech given by the Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in July 2020, when he publicly declared that America did not recognize most of the Chinese territorial claims over the islands in the South China Sea based on the so-called Nine-Dash Line. It was for the first time when America took a firm stance in the dispute, supporting claims of the secondary states in the region, including Vietnam, of course. So let's move on. Amid the emotional process of deepening ties, there are still many inhibitors that impede the creation of any alliance formally balancing Chinese influence. On the Vietnamese side, the so-called three no's strategy could be mentioned as the most important political aspect. It is a foreign policy stance, first disclosed in 1998 White Paper on Defense, and reiterated many times since. It defines Vietnam's position as based on three negative principles that seems to rule out any chance for the future US-Vietnam alliance. These go like no formal military alliances, no foreign military bases on the Vietnamese territory, and no participation in military activities aimed against any third country. They underpin the hedging strategy of Hanoi, based on finding a balance, between the competing great powers, wishing not to take sides and being afraid of the consequences of abandonment. On the other hand, some scholars question the rigidity of these bans, pointing to the two newly added layers of this strategy mentioned in the latest white paper of 2019 and called Four No's plus One Depend. The fourth no states that Vietnam will not use force in international relations first, but it also requires that Vietnam can change its stance in case it is endangered. Some understand it as an important aspect, potentially opening the door for the bending of the rules. On the other hand, China still remains the most important partner for Hanoi, enjoying the so-called strategic comprehensive partnership status, the highest possible level in the mosaic of Vietnamese foreign policy relations, much higher than the comprehensive partnership with the United States. On the American side, the ambiguity about the seriousness of Washington's commitment to defend Vietnamese interests towards rising China remains. All above-mentioned documents fall short of declaring any American intention to take sides with Vietnam in any potential dispute, which is, of course, the cornerstone of every balancing alliance. The reports mention American interest in preserving free trade through the sea lines of communication, democracy, stability, and sovereignty not undermined by any intimidating acts. It also calls for the creation of new partnerships and deepening of existing ones. Nevertheless, the conditions and the quality of such partnerships are still unknown. The human rights agenda also makes a significant obstacle, as Vietnam is well known in the international community for its pure human rights record. There was an unsuccessful move to introduce the Vietnam Human Rights Section Act by the previous US Congress, and any other similar move cannot be ruled out now. So in Vietnam, there is also an anxiety among members of the political establishment about the so-called peaceful evolution. The term describes the intention of West, clandestinely export democratic principles into Vietnam and undermine the communist one-party rule. So let's conclude it. The current situation can be concluded into the following chart or table if you want. The partnership between the United States and Vietnam has come through dynamic evolution in these 3 years, as I showed you. Both sides have expressed their readiness in expanding and strengthening of mutual relations, citing mutual interest in preserving the stable regional order in Indo-Pacific based on the principles of international law. Both have also mentioned China as a potential source of instability. Nevertheless, many hindrances still remain. The American Indo-Pacific strategy is still too ambiguous, and its security commitments towards new partners like Vietnam in potential disputes with China. The election loss of Donald Trump and the coming of the new Biden administration also raises questions about the changes in American stance toward China. When we look at Vietnam, even though it has made some important steps towards closer relations with the United States, Hanoi is definitely not ready to choose sides in the US-China power rivalry now. Its three no's policy explicitly forbids it from coming into any balancing alliances, formal or informal, and support its long-standing cooperation and struggle or hedging strategies. China is still seen as both the partner and the source of threat, and the fear of abandonment from the United States is still strong. Ergo, the creation of any explicit balancing coalition between the United States and Vietnam is out of question now. Nevertheless, we will probably see deepening of the cooperation on the more subtle level and introduction of further trust-building measures. A potential escalation of the territorial disputes in the South China Sea and the use of force by China can change the stance of both parties as well. So thank you very much for your attention, and that's all from me for now.